What's to prevent you from going out and committing murder if you don't believe in God? What do you say to people who insist that there can never be any morality without religion?
Well, yeah, as you say, this is an incredibly common question, and we're all wise to prepare an answer for it. I happen to have one. I mean, one counterpoint to this suspicion is, if you just look at the societies where there's the least homicide, the least violent crime. These really are the most atheistic societies on the planet. I mean, if you just look at the UN Development Index, which ranks societies by violent crime, by literacy, by educational attainment, by per capita income, without exception, apart from the presence of the United States somewhere in the top 20, these are the most atheistic societies on the planet. Societies like the Netherlands and Canada and Australia, Sweden. There is no evidence whatsoever that high levels of religious adherence leads to a moral society. In fact, if you look at within our own culture, if you look at the red state, blue state divide, where are most of the murders occurring? Where are most of the teen pregnancies even, and even the abortions? These are happening in those states that have the highest level of religious adherence. Strangely, the reason people rise to the defense of God is not that there's so much evidence that God exists, but that they believe that belief in God is the only intellectual framework for an objective morality. And clearly Dr. Craig is among their number. Now, the sense is that without the conviction that moral truths exist, that words like right and wrong and good and evil actually mean something, humanity will just lose its way. That's the fear, and I actually share that fear. I've come to believe that this concern that many religious people have of the erosion of secular morality is not an entirely empty one. Now, I once spoke at an academic meeting on these themes, and I said, as I will say tonight, that once we understand morality in terms of human well-being, we'll be able to make strong claims about which behaviors and ways of life are good for us and which aren't. And I cited as an example the sadism and misogyny of the Taliban as an example of a worldview that was less than perfectly conducive to human flourishing. And it turns out that to denigrate the Taliban at a scientific meeting is to court controversy. And after my remarks, I fell into debate with another invited speaker, and this is more or less exactly how our conversation went. She said, "How could you ever say that forcing women to wear burqas is wrong from the point of view of science?" I said, well, because I think it's pretty clear that right and wrong relate to human well-being, and it's just as clear that forcing half the population to live in cloth bags and beating them or killing them when they try to get out is not a way of maximizing human well-being. And she said, well, that's just your opinion. And I said, okay, well, let's make it even easier. Let's say we found a culture that was literally removing the eyeballs of every third child, okay, at birth. Would you then agree that we had found a culture that was not perfectly maximizing human well-being? And she said it would depend on why they were doing it. So after my eyebrows returned from the back of my head, I said, okay, well, let's say they're doing it for religious reasons. Let's say they have a scripture which says every third should walk in darkness or some such nonsense. Okay. And then she said, well, then you could never say that they were wrong. Okay, and so you should know, I was talking to someone who has a deep background in science and philosophy. She's actually since been appointed to the President's Council on Bioethics. She's one of 13 people advising President Obama on all of the ethical implications of advances in medicine and related science and technology. And she had just delivered a perfectly lucid lecture on the moral implications of neuroscience for the courts. And she was especially concerned that we could be subjecting captured terrorists to lie detection neuroimaging technology. And she viewed this as really an unconscionable violation of cognitive liberty. So on the one hand, her moral scruples were very finely calibrated to recoil from the slightest perceived misstep in ethical terms in our war on terror. And yet she was quite willing to forgive some primitive culture its fondness for removing the eyeballs of children in its religious rituals. And she seemed to me quite terrifyingly detached from the very real suffering of millions of women in Afghanistan at this moment. So I see this double standard as a problem. And strangely, this is precisely the erosion of basic common sense that many religious people are worried about. I hope it'll be clear to you at the end of this hour that religion is not an answer to this problem. Okay, belief in God is not only unnecessary for a universal morality, it is itself a source of moral blindness. I think kids, unless they're conditioned otherwise, don't come into this world believing themselves to be Christians or Muslims or Jews. I mean, we give them these ideas. They don't just pluck them out of the ether. And so it seems to me that simply giving honest answers to their questions, and certainly lifting this taboo of saying, I don't know. I mean, we're so reluctant to say, I don't know. And incidentally, scientists are the people who are really good at saying, I don't know. They say, I don't know all the time because they're terrified that some specialist is going to be in the room who knows so much more about what they've been asked that, you can almost never get a scientist to weigh in on anything but his most narrow area of specialization. And this is slightly off topic, but notice the fact that science is paying a price for this, in that fundamentalists are really good at using the candor of science against it. I mean, whenever scientists say, I don't know, on Larry King Live, therein rush 1,000 fundamentalists, giving us the God of the gaps there. And that's really what intelligent design is. It is politics and religion masquerading as science. Now, it's widely believed that there are two quantities in this universe. There are facts on the one hand, and of course science can give us our most rigorous discussion of these. But then there are values, which many people like Dr. Craig think science can't touch. Okay, questions of meaning and morality and what life is good for. Now, of course, everyone thinks that science can help us get what we value, okay, but it can never tell us what we ought to value. Okay, and therefore it cannot, in principle, be applied to the most important questions in human life. Questions like how we should raise our children, or what constitutes a good life. Now, it's thought, from the point of view of science, and Dr. Craig just gave voice to this opinion, that when we look at the universe, all we see are patterns of events. Just one thing follows another. Okay, and there's no corner of the universe that declares certain of its events to be good or evil, or right or wrong. Apart from us, I mean, our minds, we declare certain events to be better than others. But in doing that, it seems that we're merely projecting our own preferences and desires onto a reality that is intrinsically value-free. And where do our notions of right and wrong come from? Well, clearly they've been drummed into us by evolution. They're the product of these apish urges and social emotions. And then they get modulated by culture. You take sexual jealousy, for instance. And this is an attitude that has been bred into us over millions of years. Okay, our ancestors were highly covetous of one another, despite the fact that everyone was covered with hair and had terrible teeth. And this possessiveness now gets enshrined in various cultural institutions, like the institution of marriage. Okay, so therefore, a statement like, it's wrong to cheat on one's spouse, okay, seems a mere summation of these contingencies. It seems like it's an improvisation on the back of biology. It seems that from the point of view of science, it can't really be wrong to cheat on your spouse. Okay, this is just how apes like ourselves worry when we learn to worry with words. Okay, now here is where religious people, like Dr. Craig, begin to get a little queasy, as I think they should. Okay. And many see no alternative but to insert the God of Abraham, an Iron Age God of war, into the clockwork as an invisible arbiter of moral truth. Okay, it is wrong to cheat on your spouse because Yahweh deems that it is so. which is curious because in other moods, Yahweh is perfectly fond of genocide and slavery and human sacrifice. I'm actually not a fan, and I've received some heat for this, I'm not a fan of words like secularism and atheism. I don't think we have to name the counterpoint to religious irrationality. We don't have words to describe not being an astrologer or not being an alchemist. I mean, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm not an astrologer, I'm not an astrologer. And to some degree, I think the same will work for not being duped by the false certainties of religion. We simply need to apply reason